Welcome back to class, beautiful people. It's your TTA Pro, Mr. O, back with a grammar episode. So احنا هنكمل المشوار بتاعتنا النهارده لل-dependent clauses. احنا خلاص خلصنا ال-introductory clauses. We skipped the participles or participials for now, okay? النهارده هنكمل على ال-relative clauses. Now let's actually jump into the notes. هنبدأ with the that relative clause. هنبدأ بال that relative clause. We're going to talk about يعني ايه relative clause ونشوف أنواع relative clauses. بعد كده هنشوف examples ونشوف بيجي صح ازاي وايه المطلوب في relative clause. After that هنشوف mistakes في that relative clause and then هنشوف practice. Questions, problems, or concerns? Okay, let's begin. So ايه الأهداف بتاعتنا اليوم? Number one, we want to define a relative clause. يعني ايه relative clause? We want to identify a relative clause, understand the rules, and identify any mistakes. Why are we learning this? ده بيجي في الامتحان. طلبة كتير ما بيعرفوش the rules for the relative clause. So we actually need to learn them, right? Why do you need to learn this? Again, if you're ACT, you'll have about like 3 or 4 questions in more modern tests. Okay, so let's actually begin here. فاحنا بدأنا بالintroductory clause, right? في independent idea والdependent idea. الفوكس بتاعتنا على dependent دلوقتي. We need to learn the different forms of dependent ideas. So احنا بدأنا بالintroductory clause, right? Subordinating, prepositional, participial. بعد كده كان في modifiers. So right now we skip this. I will go back to this. Why? هو concept صعب جدا وبيجي بس like one question في modifying issues. So I feel like the risk reward or reward to work ratio is not equal. So I skip this for now, right? Today, however, we are going to focus on the relative clause, right? So what is a relative clause? What is it, right? أنا قلت الاسم ده 50 مرة لحد دلوقتي. We use relative pronouns to introduce a relative clause. Okay, so don't forget a clause معناها it's an idea. ممكن يبقى فيها subject and verb. ممكن يبقى independent or dependent, right? But relative clauses are dependent. طيب تمام. What are relative pronouns? That, who, which, دول الأساسيين. Right? When, where, whose, and who. So our main focus يبقى أول 3. أما نيجي ناخد who هناخد برضو whose و whom. Just so you know. Our focus today will be that. We're going to focus on that. We're going to see the rules for that relative clause. هتسمعوا الاسم ده كتير جدا, right? So before we begin برضو, I want to clear some confusion. The word that can appear in 3 ways. So برضو لازم منحفظ. We need to be flexible. Language is flexible. Language محتاج واحد فعلا بياخد وبيدي باللغة. Right? So here ممكن يجي as a relative pronoun, right? Again, I like the car. No, excuse me. It should be like this. I like that. That's a pronoun. This is a pronoun. Okay, ده كده معناها right بيربط أو مرتبطة with a noun. إيه هو that؟ ممكن يبقى أي حاجة. Usually in the test when you see this لوحدها بيبقى غلط. Right? Another thing ممكن يجي that ممكن يبقى adjective. People believe that taking a shower then stepping out in the cold will make you sick. That idea, this is an adjective بقى. بنقول عليها demonstrative. بنقول عليه ايه؟ demonstrative adjective. So كده أنا بقول أنا بربط that idea بيرجع للفكرة اللي قبليها. This is an important skill ده هيساعدنا in relevancy based questions or reading questions. So remember this demonstrative adjective. That idea is outdated and no longer recognized. وزي ما احنا قلنا ممكن يجي as a regular pronoun. I like that. اوكي بس احنا مش هنركز على اي حاجه من دولت. احنا النهارده هنركز على relative clause نفسه. This is a mistake. احنا نركز على relative clause نفسه. I like the car that is over there. This will be our focus, okay? This will be our focus. مش pronoun, مش adjective, مش adverb, right? So سؤال بقى. What will you be learning in this chapter? Relative clauses, subordinate clauses, non-essential clauses, or fragments? Yes, it's important نعرف احنا بنتعلم ايه. Some students يقعدوا يتنحوا يقولوا احنا بناخد ايه. Right? You know this. Right, Renat and Farida, good job, guys. Where's my broskies, Eugene? Right, yeah, we're learning the relative clause. Good, you're focused with me. So let's jump into the actual notes, right? Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, there's another question. Now, what is a relative clause? We actually didn't take this, right? A clause that begins with a modifier, a clause that begins with a relative pronoun. We did take this. A clause that begins with a subordinate or a clause that ends in ing. What is a relative clause, right? Good job, Mrs. Malak. Anybody else? Right, Farida, good. Eugene, good. And Renat, right? It's a clause that begins with a relative pronoun. Well, I was thorough. In all these notes, متأكد انتوا فاهمين بنقرا ايه. Okay, so is a relative clause independent or is it dependent? Is the relative clause independent or dependent? Good job, Mrs. Malak. Excellent. Renat. Where's Farida? Tick, tock, tick, tock. Yeah. It's not independent, right? Remember, ممكن relative clause يبقى فيها subject to verb وهنلاقي subject to verb. إجباري يبقى في verb, but still dependent. عشان it's not a main subject and it's not a main verb. Okay, now let's jump into this. The actual notes بقى for a relative clause, right? So here, the relative clause that. Note, that is essential. Okay? افتكروا ده. Essential يعني ايه؟ يعني مهم. That relative clause محسوبة essential clause, meaning it never receives punctuation. Okay, guys? Remember this rule? بتيجي. Now you know it. Now لو لقيت مثلا comma that أنا عارف ده غلط. It's essential information. وطبعا هوريكم examples, right? Did that relative clause begin with that and continue with a verb? ده برضو حاجة مهمة جدا أنا عايزكم تفتكروها. That relative clause لازم يجي بالverb بتاعتها separate من السنتنس. انتوا عارفين independent idea فيها subject to verb, correct? Well, now that relative clause has its own verb. So here, for the disillusioned artists of the Dada movement, comma, the war merely confirmed the degradation of social structures that led to such violence, corrupting nationalist policies, right? Be patient, Mrs. Malak, right? So here, that led, this is my relative clause. أهم حاجة في relative clause يجي بالverb, ممكن يجي بالsubject, ممكن, بس مش شرط. الشرط يجي بالverb, right? So here, that led to such violence. This is my relative clause. You have your that, you have your verb, led, وفي الobject بقى. لازم يجي بالobject مش شرط. الشرط الوحيد في that relative clause is it must have a verb. والverb بعيد عن الجملة, right? عشان هنا الجملة the war merely confirmed, right? So here it's subject and verb of the sentence, the main subject to main verb. فاكرين كلمنا وقلنا ال independent idea has the main subject and main verb. ممكن يبقى في other subjects and verbs بس هما مش الأساس، هما مش main, right? So keep this in mind when you talk about that relative clause. ولو شفت that relative clause وكلهم مش بس that which who لازم يجوا بالverb. So here that led to such violence, right? So like we said, this is a relative clause with بتاعتنا. You have your verb, you have your object. إجباري. Look at another example, right? Look at this example. The accompanying article reported that the Women's Fusion League for Good Government provided 1,100 sandwiches for men working the polls on election day. Do you see my that relative clause, right? فين الverb provided. ده إجباري بقى. So في rules برضه بنمشي عليها، يعني مثلا ما اقدرش احط comma جوه، ما اقدرش split that من الverb. You have to keep these rules in mind عشان لو عملت كده you create fragments. وشايفين how long the relative clause is. هي مش كلمة أو كلمتين. It's a full phrase وأطول من الجملة نفسها. So سؤال بقى that relative clause بيعمل إيه؟ Right? So هنا the accompanying article, right? The article, the subject, the main subject. The article عمل إيه بقى؟ The article reported, the verb, صح? Reported إيه? That the women's fusion, this is my object. Right? عشان كده برضو ما نقدرش نحط comma قبل that. عشان usually the relative clause كلها بيبقى the direct object of the verb. بيبقى the direct object of the verb. Let's try another one, right? So here, although تقولوا عنده verb وعنده كل حاجة, it's still dependent. So عايزين نبطل برضو حركة نحفظ أو subject verb يعني independent. No, إحنا خلاص عدينا المرحلة ديت. Right? عدينا المرحلة ديت. So keep this in mind. طيب. The that clause is a noun clause. في حد يعرف يعني إيه noun clause? Right? So a noun clause معناها بيبقى clause على بعضيها. ممكن يبقى subject or object. What does this mean بقى صح؟ Look at these examples. Or predicate nominative يعني بيوصف. So the that clause is a noun clause. That means هو clause, phrase كلها لبعضيها محسوبة noun اسم. So noun ده في الجملة ممكن يبقى subject of a sentence, ممكن يبقى object of a sentence, or ممكن يبقى the predicate nominative of a sentence. Well, Mr. Sema, what are you talking about? So, look at this example. That she should forget me, right? Now, look at this relative clause. That she should forget me. وإحنا قلنا it's a noun clause. هنا جاية كsubject. And see the components, right? The composition بتاعتها. You have that, you have a verb, صح? بس كلها على بعضيها is one thing, is one subject. كلها على بعضيها is one subject. And then بيجي the verb or the main verb of the sentence. You see that? So noun clause في أنواع كتير أو كذا نوع noun clauses. وكلهم بيبدأوا ب that, which, why, when, how. So for example, أنا ممكن أقول how you study is none of my concern, right? The noun clause هنا, how you study. Do you see, we begin with a relative pronoun or WH word. فيها verb, بس كلها قطعة واحدة. كلها بنشوفها كnoun as a subject. كل ده على بعضيها as a noun. والverb بقى بتاعتها is none of my business, right? So we're talking about that phrase. And so the that phrase برضو is a noun clause. So برضو ممكن يبقى subject or object or predicate nominative. يعني ايه predicate nominative? A noun that functions as an adjective. So شايفين احنا داخلين في حاجات تقيلة شوية. شايفين ازاي بقى احنا مش نقدر بس نحفظ، لازم نشوف الايديا ده بيعمل لي ايه. If you're SAT or ACT, I think everybody here is SAT or ACT, هيطلبوا منكم هيديك phrase ويقول لك الفريز ده بيعمل ايه في الجمله. لو شلنا الفريز ده هنخسر ايه؟ So now you have to begin learning بقى the functions of the information, the function of the phrases. في بداية الكورس أكيد كنت بتقولوا well this is easy. شفتوا ضحكت عليكم إزاي؟ Right? Look at this example. Example number 2. That she delivered a marvelous performance. This is what I'm talking about. This is a noun clause. هنا بيبدأ بذات فيها subject or verb. بس الphrase كلها محسوبة noun. The whole phrase, it's one piece. It's not just one word, right? And then بقى we have the verb of the sentence or the main verb of the sentence, her parents. Or ممكن يبقى the object. انتوا عارفين طبعا object, direct object مفعل به, right? I think ده اسمه بالعربي. لو بتاخدوا عربي مفعل I spell that correct? به أي خدمة. Right? I'm a bit, جاهل بالعربي شوية. كتبت عربي. I taught myself. So here, she said, right? So now we have our subject. Said, صح? We have our verb. What did she say يا جماعة? That she can speak 3 languages. This is my direct object. وده اللي هنتكلم عليه. This is really important ليه؟ عشان في rule ناخدها كمان شوية ممنوع أحط comma قبل that. وده السبب. لو حطيت comma ما بين that وما بين الverb ده كده بعمل verb comma object. ولو حطيت verb comma object this is a fragment of, or زي ما بنقول في الفرنسوا fragment. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I've never spoken French. I tried, but in high school, but I dropped out of it. Not high school, French. Okay. Ikman. Any questions on the noun clause? Any questions? وطبعا ده كل ده نظري وهنشوف زي ما انتوا عارفين بالpractice actual, التدريب نفسه. Here. That punctuation in clause punctuation. Let's talk about this. In general, احنا قلنا that phrase can never receive a comma, right? That phrase cannot receive a comma قبليها وهنشوف examples في common mistakes. However, احنا بنتعامل مع that phrase like its own little island. احنا ممكن أو نقدر نحط punctuation inside that phrase. Well, wow. What does that mean, right? What does that mean? So أول example عايز أقولها لكم احنا ممكن نحط مثلا a non-essential clause. So let me talk about the non-essential clause. A non-essential clause is a double comma phrase, right? Or double dash phrase. A double comma phrase with double dash phrase ممكن يتحط أي حتة في الجملة. مفيش limit عليها. Right? So أنا بقول لكم you can place a non-essential clause inside the that clause. Okay, let's see an example. Here. The accompanying article reported that, well, here we go, that the Women's Fusion League for Good Government, comma, a new bipartisan group, comma, provided 1,100 sandwiches. This is my that clause. Final verb, provided, right? Provided. احنا نقدر نحط زي ما شايفين بالاخضر هنا double comma phrase inside the that clause and that's acceptable. انا بقول لكم كده عشان ده بيجي students ما يعرفوش كده, right? افرض حطينا one comma. عندي سؤال, افرض بقى شلنا comma, right? So نشيل بقى الكوما ديت وحطينا comma واحده وده كده غلط, right? عشان انا اقدر احط that comma verb بس ممنوع أعمل that comma verb. This is incorrect. So ينفع نحط double comma phrase inside the relative clause. اللي ما ينفعش نحط one comma. Except in some situations. Look at this other example. Example number 2. The accompanying article reported نفس الفريز على فكرة, نفس الexample. بس زي ما انتوا عارفين اهو حطينا double comma phrase جوه, right? Double comma verb. برضو نقدر بنفس الشكل نحط double dash verb. Both are acceptable. Double comma verb, double dash verb. These two are acceptable inside the that clause. وليه أنا بقول كده؟ طلبة بيحفظوا ممنوع نعمل كده. And this is a problem. عشان that is acceptable and it comes وهيجي أسئلة ومش عايزاكم تلخبطوا. عشان كده برضو بقول أما تيجي تشوفوا relative clause اتعاملوا معاها كهي جزيرة لوحدها. It's on its own little special island, right? Here, look at this one برضو. نقدر نحط parentheses, دول parentheses. مش عارف شايفينها ولا لا. Right? Parentheses verb. So نقدر نحط double comma verb, double dash verb, parentheses verb. كل ده مقبول inside the that relative clause. Any questions here? كلمت كتير صح؟ جالكوا شلل؟ I hope not. برضو ممكن نحط inside the that relative clause subordinating clauses. فاكرين subordinating clause ولا لا؟ Right? Because since, right, although دولة subordinating clauses نقدر نحط subordinating clauses inside a relative clause. What does that mean? Look at this example. He believed that, right? Hello, hello, hello. Lag? ولا تمام؟ I'm lagging. What about now? Okay, it's good now. Cool. He believed that if he could clean up the government, comma, other problems would solve themselves. You see this example here? هنا في one comma وده مقبول. ليه؟ عشان احنا قلنا برضو نقدر نحط subordinating clause جوه ال that relative clause. شايفين clause inside of a clause. صح؟ So عادي بنتعامل معاها ك subordinating clause عادي, right? That if اهو الconjunction بتاعتي he clean up the government, comma, بعدين other problems, subject and verb. So that's okay. ينفع نحط that subordinating conjunction, comma, subject and verb وده مقبول. This is acceptable. Just like in non-essential clause, ال subordinating clause ينفع نحطها. عشان برضه قلت لكم it's important ناخد بالنا بالnames عشان نعرف الفرق ما بين ال ideas, right? Here's another example. He tried to climb the mountain that, although, the subordinating clause بتاعتي, subordinating conjunction, that although gave him issues in the beginning of his trek, comma, it is now groveling at his feet, right? In that relative clause, subordinating conjunction, that independent, comma, independent, ولكن كلها لبعضيها dependent. Language is beautiful. عشان كده بقول لكم be flexible. So عشان كده في البداية أنا بقول اتعاملوا مع that relative clause وال which clause وال who clause كجزيرة. هي dependent وكل حاجة بس apply regular sentence rules to it. بعيد عن ال independent idea. I see it separately. Right? I see it separately. طيب كمان. Number 5. That relative clause can have two verbs, right? Investigators determined that he had gathered to wear his seatbelt and had fallen out of his plane. وطبعا فين that relative clause يا علي؟ ليه التأخير ده يا علي؟ نسيت؟ Right, so here, that he had neglected to wear his seatbelt and had fallen. So my that clause, the relative clause يعني, right? The relative clause, then that relative clause would be given verb بتاعتها. احنا قلنا ممكن يجي ب one or two verbs. Please علي أنا communicate with me. We'll review inshallah tomorrow and I'm recording this session. أي خدمة. So that ممكن يجي بالtwo verbs, right? احنا قلنا that برضو لازم يجي بالverb اساسا one verb minimum. برضو احنا قلنا that ممكن يجي بالnon-essential clause. وقلنا that ممكن يجي بالconjunction comma verb. You see all of these combinations? كل combinations دولت انا عايزاكم تتعودوا عليهم. انا عايزاكم تتعودوا عليهم. وبرضو that in the end can come in a series, right? كlist. They insisted that both acts levy taxes on them and that, right? شايفين الدبل comma هنا? Under the old English principle of no taxation without representation, comma, Parliament had no right. Right? So ممكن that يجي ورا بعض وبرضه ممكن يجي بكذا تشكيل. These were the rules for the that relative clause. Stop watching the video here. خشوا في notes. Practice what you learned. You can learn anything. Mr. Sema out. Bye. Bye.